I would have to say that the most significant impact that John has had on Sarasota County is his strategic thinking about how to identify, to inventory and collect the lands in our community worthy of preservation.
It was really his work that laid the groundwork for an organized system to identify and acquire environmental properties in the county.
Over a third of Sarasota County is largely preserved because of some of his efforts.
I think probably any park that we have in Sarasota County, whether it's Oscar Shear State Park or a local recreational area or a small park, probably has his footprint or fingerprint on it or handprint on it all over the county.
JonThaxton is one of the brilliant strategic minds in our community.
He puts his heart into bettering this community. I think everything he does is really about the betterment of the Sarasota community.
JonThaxton was born December 7, 1957, to Edward and Mary Thaxton. He was the oldest of 5 children.
It was a large family, and at the time we would attract attention when we went into a restaurant or, any sort of a public place, because the average family size in the early 60s was not like it was 40, 50 years before, when larger families were common, if not the norm. So we would attract a great deal of attention. We were a rambunctious crowd. We grew up with a great deal of access to the out of doors and natural settings, and so being confined was never a strong suit for any of us.
A 5th-generation Sarasotan, tracing his family roots back to the Knights who arrived in the area in the mid-1850s and the Lewis clan, he grew up in the small community of Osprey.
Osprey was self-contained. It had its own community center, its own ball fields, its own grocery store, perfectly balanced with 2 bars and 2 churches. There was nothing that you could not get in Osprey. We had our own hardware store, which was one of my first jobs, Bernie's Hardware, Tashnese Groceries. It's since been changed tremendously. Now it's just something that people drive through, where when I was growing up it was still a destination. It was a commercial fishing village. I spent a great deal of time on my friend's father's commercial boats, leaving out of Blackburn Point and Vamo area.
His father was in real estate as vice president for the Paver Development Company. He was also a rancher.
It's the T8 Egg Ranch. So we had a up to 40-acre ranch. We had several steers, a few heifers, and citrus grove, row crop, turkeys, swine, and 5,000 to 7,000 chickens. So we made fertilizer from the manure. We sold young birds for frying. We sold older birds for stewing and baking, but the main business was eggs, white eggs.
As a young boy, John helped work the ranch.
One of my duties was milking the heifers in the morning, which is not a problem until it's cold out, and that's frustrating because you had to milk them before you went to school. We usually had 2, and I had to do both of them. So I learned tricks about how to warm my hands before I went out in the dark to milk the cows. We had to collect the eggs. We had to package the eggs. We had to spread the manure. The chickens and the rabbits. We also had a couple hundred rabbits that we sold for meat, and the butchering of the animals and the dressing was also part of our duties. So it was a real working, functioning ranch.
Inspired by his mother, he developed an interest in fishing and hunting at an early age.
She taught me to shoot a rifle at a very young age. I can't really, probably 12 or 13. And when all of my other friends were getting BB guns, my mother bought me a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun. She didn't like BB guns because she felt that children treated them like toys, and our family firearms were tools, and they were to be treated just like any other tool that you would use.
He attended Osprey Elementary School, now the Spanish Point Welcome Center, and was a good student in grade school. However, his primary interest was in exploring the natural area around him.
And I would walk out my back door and immediately begin hunting just feet from the house because there was nothing there.
Palmer Ranch was an undeveloped cow pasture and scrublands where he would hunt for dove, quail, deer, and hog. It was here John developed his lifelong passion for preserving the area's natural lands.
The Wilbanks Point homestead, which is now Pelican Cove, was undeveloped. The Yelling Eyed property was completely undeveloped. So having these, what are now iconic bayfront locations in a natural state with only 1 or 2 homes on it as a young boy is just about as adventuresome as you can imagine.
The Seaboard Gulf Coast Railroad ran near his home. One of his favorite adventures was to explore its tracks.
The first time I saw the Seaboard Coastline Railroad would have been about at the age of 12 or 13. And it was, I can just remember the day that I first set foot on it. It was just so exciting. Then we started hopping trains on it because there was a trestle near the eastern part of the county where we would meet the tracks. So we could easily run and jump on the trains and take them down to Clark Road. I went as far as Bradenton one time. And of course, we could never get a train back, so we had to figure out alternative ways to get home. And that was either walking or hitchhiking.
John entered Venice High School in 9th grade. However, by this time, he had been influenced by negative elements and found his interest was not in studies.
Got arrested 3 times in high school. I remember the 3rd time, I called my father up. I was in the Venice jail and asked him to come and get me. And he said, "What'd you do this time?" I said, "Well, shoplifting." He said, "Well, what'd you steal?" I said, "A Colby brand potato stick can." He said, "How much did that cost?" I said, 14 cents. "How much money did you have in your pocket?" "About $41. Click. He hung up. I later found out that traumatized my brothers and sisters, that my father would leave their older brother in jail overnight.
However, his high school biology teacher, Bill Wimbush, was sure if John could turn his energy into something he was passionate about, his life would change.
I-75 was not in Sarasota County at the time. I-75 stopped around Ellington. And I looked at the path for I-75. I drew it over quad maps, and I saw that it was going to impact significant wetlands. And so Mr. Wimbush convinced me to write a letter to FDOT to have them reroute 75 to avoid these environmentally sensitive areas.
John presented his case to the Sarasota Planning Board.
He came into a room full of suits, and he looked like he had just come out of the woods. His hair was all over the place. He was wide-eyed, and he was in a room full of grown-ups, but he didn't seem out of place at all. He had such a muscular, environmental way about him, of confidence about what he was talking about, that you couldn't not listen. You couldn't not listen to him.
It was a total failure. Of course, they put the interstate right down the middle of the wetlands, wherever they wanted to put it. But in terms of environmental activism, that was my first introduction.
The impact Wimbush made on him was the turning point in John's life, and would in turn be the spark that would drive John's efforts for the environment. In 1974, under Wimbush's guidance, John was a founding member of the Venice High School Ecology Club.
He gave me this diversion, this environmental activism, that I could actually still get in trouble, still create havoc, only it was perfectly legal and also productive at the same time. There was something that was good that was going to come from that.
He was a member of the Venice High School Marine Corps Junior ROTC for 4 years, which helped shape his focus, if not then, later in life. John graduated from Venice High School in 1975 and went to work for his father's real estate company.
I was very, very young, looking for my age. So I resorted to selling very low income FHA and VA homes, starter homes, to people, which kind of was my first introduction into this concept of affordable housing.
He found his niche in helping young buyers purchase their first homes. In the process, he discovered a greater benefit than simply a paycheck.
There was nothing more rewarding than selling a home to a young couple who have very limited income potential and seeing their equity grow through 2 or 3 home sales, which I would do for them, and then ultimately see them living aside individuals that have 4 to 5 times the income that they have, but because they worked hard, saved their money, built equity, and made good real estate choices, they were right there. So that still gives me chills and good feeling inside.
In 1993, John was newly single, and after a few dance lessons, went to a Tampa dance club for a night of fun. It would change his personal life.
Saw Drew and truly fell in love from across the room. Although it took me 3 or 4 dates to remember her name, I'm very poor with names.
We met contra dancing.
I knew that I wanted to marry her, so we had a long-distance relationship.
That lasted for 2 years before I finally moved here to Sarasota.
She worked as a juvenile probation officer, which I always thought was kind of ironic that she would fall for a juvenile delinquent. I think she's still trying to fix me, unsuccessfully. So we dated for a while.
He very uncharacteristically said that he had a Valentine present for me. Doesn't really do holidays too much. And so there was this box of the candy hearts, you know, the candy hearts, that he had in his pocket. And it had 1 heart in it, and it said, "Marry me." So he never actually asked, he just had this romantic gesture.
The invitation said that the wedding was going to be somewhere between 1 and 4 o'clock. We didn't have a set time.
We were supposed to get married on the back deck, but it was drought-breaking rain. And so all of the guests, like 200 people, wound up crowding into this room and the porch and everywhere they could go.
We were in a long drought. I think it was over 90 days we had gone without rain. And it rained all day on our wedding, which we later found out is supposed to be good luck. So instead of having it in the gardens, we forced everyone onto the porches and into the house, and we're married in this room.
Drew encouraged John's environmental endeavors. He continued his study of the environment and the creatures we share it with. He became nationally renowned for his work documenting the Florida scrub jay.
And ended up contributing some really valuable information about their distribution and their family pairs, banding birds, recognizing different families, documenting the family relationships and the territorial boundaries. And that was really a significant contribution for someone who, you know, didn't have a PhD in the topic.
So he's a published author on the subject, and in fact, the management of Oscar Scheer Park is completely different now as a result of insights John had about management.
One day I was out on a tour of Oscar Scheer Park, and out of nowhere John started whistling, and out of the sky this little scrub jay flew and landed on his finger. He held his hand in the air and this bird landed on his finger. I had never seen anybody in my life do anything like that.
I have walked Oscar Scheer State Park with him on several occasions, and he truly has an animal magnetism. Literally, animals are drawn to him. A scrub jay will come perch on his finger. A small green lizard that's an endangered species will be on a bush. He'll walk by it, and the thing will jump on in his hand.
In 1996, internationally acclaimed photographer Joel Sartour contacted John requesting he work with him to photograph the scrub jay. As a result, John was photographed and featured in National Geographic. Through his efforts, he understood the area's growth, if unchecked, would have a negative impact on the environment.
I started studying land use, transportation, utilities planning, and a lot of the other aspects that went into making decisions about growth. Because I really early on made this connection between the loss of our natural landscapes and the amount of growth that the community was seeing.
He set his sights on becoming a part of the volunteer Sarasota Planning Commission, where he might be able to influence the decisions to be made regarding the area's growth.
But you had to be appointed by the county commissions. But because of my reputation as a tree hugger, they felt that they did not want a person like that on that board. So I had the only contentious planning commission appointment in the history of the county. I believe it was my 13th try after 7 years that I finally got on the board, and that was only after 2 commissioners were elected, with their campaign promise being that if they were elected, they would put me on the Planning Commission.
He served on the commission for 4 years, when in 2000, District 5 Commissioner Bob Anderson encouraged him to run for county commission.
And I thought for sure that an uneducated, troublesome redneck from Osprey didn't have a prayer getting elected, but enough people talked to me about it and convinced me that I should try. So I did it under the understanding that I would not win the election and I could go back to doing what I was doing before.
John won the election and was re-elected to 2 consecutive terms. During his tenure, he twice chaired the county commission, served on numerous influential boards and committees. As a county commissioner, John developed his skills and improved his knowledge to become a regional expert in such critical areas as growth, land use, water and transportation planning, and environmental resource conservation.
He is not only an activist in the environmental community, but he's a realist, and he also comes at things from a business perspective. So he was very well respected when it came to preserving parks and recreation area and open space for people to enjoy. He had a very practical approach, much appreciated by not only the community, but the constituents that he represented that wanted, nature walks and opportunities to canoe and look at birds and enjoy the wildlife that we have here in Sarasota County.
He has this visceral, internal passion of knowing what's at stake, what can be lost, and how irreversible that is. Now, a lot of people who have been in Sarasota a while have that feeling, that understanding of loss, but John combines that with the fact that for a quarter of his life, he served on either the Planning Commission or the County Commission, and that gave him a lot of understanding about how government works and how government doesn't work. And so when you combine his personal legacy, his understanding of what's at stake with his knowledge of how government works, that's what's made him the most effective and successful advocate on behalf of protecting environmental land in the county.
One of his most passionate efforts returned him to his childhood. It was the county acquisition of the Gulf Coast Seaboard Rail Line and developing it into the multi-use recreational Legacy Trail. But first, voters had to approve a referendum for the purchase.
We put together a great political action committee. We had an unbelievable Friends of the Legacy Trail doing all of the groundwork and the footwork. And the result was that we won every precinct in Sarasota County except for one. Was very rewarded with the very clear and decisive victory, the support of this community for its public amenities. And we're not finished. There's more to do. We'd like to see the trail connected into our Newtown community, into the community of Inglewood, possibly to Benderson Park. There's just a lot of connections now that we have the spine in place. There's really no limit as to how great this trail can be.
As he was about to run for his 4th term in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that charter counties must require term limits.
And I went from being an uncontested candidate to an unqualified candidate.
While planning his next phase, he received a call from Terry Hansen, then Executive Director of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation.
She offered me a position at Gulf Coast Community Foundation. I knew nothing about the industry. Very little about philanthropy or charitable giving. Wasn't even sure I could spell philanthropy at the time, but she gave me a shot, and it's worked out marvelously.
In this role, John works with nonprofit organizations, donors, and other community partners to invest Gulf Coast grants and resources in projects that will transform our region and improve public policies.
He has just been unbelievable. His ability to go into the community, to take an initiative and quietly negotiate behind the scenes with nonprofits, with donors, with governmental entities, to come up with an outcome that is a sustainable solution, it's incredible.
In any community, some people wish something would happen, some people want something to happen, and some people make things happen. And that's what John represents at Gulf Coast Community Foundation. Whether it be opioid, homelessness, preserving our natural environment, John is the person that has the ability to connect these dots and pull people together to really address the issue.
He is aware of issues in the area. His impact he's had on the homeless issue in Sarasota County is probably greater than anyone else that you could name, elected or not elected official.
The reality is that Sarasota County has about 38,000 households out of 172,000 households total that are pretty much living paycheck to paycheck. We have another 18,000 households that spend in excess of 50% of their income on housing. They are $400 away from being homeless. So it's not always because of a mental illness or laziness, substance abuse, or alcoholism that people find themselves in a state of homelessness.
Along with his work with Gulf Coast Community Foundation, he continues to serve the county, providing a key role as co-architect of the Bayfront 2020 initiative, now known as the Bay, to sustainably redevelop 53 acres of city-owned Sarasota Bayfront.
John was one of the very first people that I got to speak to when we were first dreaming up the new Bayfront project. And the whole concept of the Bayfront 2020, bringing the community together. And one of the first presentations that I made on the dream of our Bayfront was with John. And ever since then, he's been the most incredible sounding board for me and the best listener of just about anybody that I've ever met.
John was an instrumental stakeholder in architecting what is now known by the general public as the Bay. So very early on, identifying who the core team should be that was originally titled Bayfront 2020, recruiting those board members and basically building that coalition that helped bring the issue of this pristine opportunity for Sarasota County to revitalize what is a parking lot and turn it into a beautiful park. He takes a lot of credit for being the man behind the scenes and bringing that to fruition, along with a group of other people too.
It's a balance of the old with the new, and I think, John really understands how our community needs to preserve itself, but at the same time advance itself.
When provided the opportunity to name a preserve area in Oscar Scherer State Park, John had no hesitation. The facility bears the name of his adventurous mother, the Mary Thaxton Memorial Preserve. Today, he continues to enjoy nature and the outdoors, and while a torn retina has retired his hunting days, he continues to fish the waters of the bay.
Growing up where I did, again, I spent a great deal of time on the commercial fishing boats. I built my first boat when I was 16 out of marine plywood. I launched it in Catfish Creek at the terminus of Famo Way. It never returned from its maiden voyage. It is still sitting somewhere on the bottom of Catfish Creek, but I had a passion for fishing. I still do. I don't get to do it as much as I like to. But my favorite fishing right now is tarpon fishing. My best is a 160-pound tarpon from a kayak using 20-pound test line, so we call it the Casey Keys sleigh ride. It's a gas to hook such a large fish on such a small boat. I don't get to hunt much anymore. My favorite hunting used to be quail, which is somewhat ironic for a person who has spent a large portion of his life as a bird enthusiast, looking for birds through binoculars and saving habitat to make sure that birds are here for future generations. But that's where I learned about birds. That's where I learned about biology. So I still wish I could hunt. I just can't anymore.
But it's not all serious business for John. He is an avid fan of the 1960s television program, The Andy Griffith Show, and maintains what may be the largest collection of the show's memorabilia in existence. And each December, he turns his home into a Mayberry museum.
I like the show. I think the show is in many ways symbolic of my own life. I have over 500 autographs, pieces from the set. So it continues to grow. It has become more of an obsession than a hobby, but it's pretty novel.
We asked John Thaxton his advice for those who follow.
My passion was always my community, as learned from my parents and their parents and the parents before them. Sarasota was a very important place. It was a place worth fighting for. And so I was always motivated by this passion of making sure that when I died and left this community, that it was a better place because of what I did. So my work as a real estate broker helping young families, my work at the County Commission building what I believe is a more sustainable community, my work at Gulf Coast helping families in need, for me just all assimilate into this single passion of Sarasota County becoming this great and fabulous place to live, and I had something to do with it. So if I were someone in the future, and I was motivated by a gentleman named A.B. Edwards. He was the first mayor of Sarasota. And A.B. Edwards, over 100 years ago, said something almost identical to what I did. In fact, I could probably be accused of plagiarizing what he said about Sarasota. This is my house, this is my home, this is the place I vote, and I'm going to do everything that I can to make it a better place. So I was inspired by those words. They've guided me, and I would suggest to subsequent generations that they're really solid words to live by.